Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see the chatter here and friends meeting new friends or meeting old friends. So welcome. My name is Nagel. I'm the program manager at the Nagel Institute. And I wanted to introduce our speakers by way of the program that these two are here, and it's called the Prophet's Chamber. And chamber is a little odd for a name, but if you think of chamber, it's kind of a room set apart or a time set apart. And the Nagel Institute launched this program in 2015. And it was for visiting scholars to spend 1 to 4 months at Kelvin University to continue their work on scholarly research, finish a dissertation, or write a book chapter. We partner with a couple of different foundations. One is Langham Scholars, who helped us find the unique scholars. We also, Nagel has another program that runs a visiting scholar program to that, so it's just natural for them to come to the Prophet's Chamber. So our scholars usually have interest in certain topic areas that we are looking for, like faith and science, creation care, or world religions like Africa or India. We support 5 to 8 scholars a year. And why in Grand Rapids? Why at Kelvin? Well, of course, because we have great faculty and students here. We have the Heckman Library, some great, amazing resources, and the Melcat resources that our scholars can get from all over the United States. And also strategic missionaries and ministries, and the Grand Rapids publishers, such as Erdman's, Baker, Zondervan's, and Kriegel. Again, since we launched in 2015, nearly every single scholar has met their research and scholarly goals, completing dissertations, articles, conference presentations, and even several books. I'm honored to host these 2 very busy scholars from around the world who can tap into Kelvin University resources. We have cookies in the oven, so they will be coming momentarily, and if you need one, they'll be warm, go ahead. But otherwise, between the 2 scholars, we will have time to get up and get a fresh, warm cookie. Our first scholar is Olatoyin Olakudana James. She is lecturer with the Department of Creative Arts, University of Lagos, Nigeria. She is alumna of the Harvard Mellon School of Theater and Performance Research, and fellow of the FA Institute of Advanced Studies. She is also principal investigator under the African Multiple Cluster Center, Bayreuth University, Germany. Her interests are in African studies, theater, film, and gender studies. And aside from her academic qualifications, Olatoyin is a theater practitioner with over 2 decades of active practice. We're going to have our 2 lectures first and then question and answers afterwards. So write those down if you have any. Olatoyin's working title is Christians Can't Be Feminists, a reflection of African reality or religion. So welcome today. Give my round of applause.
Praise the Lord. That's the Nigerian culture. When I say praise the Lord, say hallelujah. Praise the Lord, somebody. Hallelujah. As far as you're here tonight, you are Nigerian. Praise the Lord, somebody. Hallelujah. Yes, she said so much about me already, and I was wondering, is that truly me? I'm really happy. Okay. My name is Olatoyin Olakudana James, and I'm really happy to be here. I'll be standing on existing protocol and appreciating every one of us here tonight. Haven't taken time out to be here of our tight schedule. Thank you for coming. I'm going to graciously appreciate my First Lady. Thank you for making time to be here. And of course, my host, Ms. Nelly Koistra. Thank you for extending that very warm hand of reception to us. Thank you very much. My academic mentor is also not here, but he's supposed to be connected virtually, but he's not here. Professor Afe Adugabe is the one always trying to drag me. I'm in performance. This man is always trying to drag me, come to theology club. And now I'm in theology club. And I'm really happy about it. So my presentation today is actually one of the findings of an ongoing research with the Nagel Institute. If you're struggling with my accents, it's the same way I struggle to listen to you. So it's I'm basically going to present one of the findings of an ongoing research with the Nagel Institute under engaging African realities. So I'd like to say a few words about this research before I come back to the presentation for today. The title of the research is Nollywood and Evangelical Films, Exploring Nigerian Cinema in Relation to African Traditional Histories, Values, and Spirituality. In very simplistic terms, all this grammar is not necessary, really. The Nigerian film industry has just been chosen as a microcosm of the African worldview to interrogate Africa's traditional histories, values, and spirituality. And of course, those paradigm shifts in the construction of African contemporary reality. Now, to do that, 6 movies have been selected. And in line with this investigation, also certain variables were also designed to help delimit the scope of the study, which would include that the cultural images created in the movies will be interrogated, the thematic trust with Nigerian societies being the subject matter, metaphysical concepts and abstractions, spiritual and religious innovation, and lastly, gender. And the simple rationale for this perspective study is the need to develop a working curriculum which will bring about some interconnectivity between film studies and theology as practiced all over Nigeria, and to be more precise, 2 departments, that's the Christian Religious Studies and the Performing Arts, which of course is where I'm coming from. So, the presentation today is titled, Christians Can't Be Feminists, a true reflection of African reality or religion. And this basically responds to the gender perspective of the ongoing research. To start with, having watched the 6 movies, I discovered that there is a lacuna in the construction of the requirements of femininity in Africa. And this has to do with the placement of religion and society generally. So the study seeks to interrogate the convergences and divergences in the projection of femininity from a tripodal perspective. That means we're going to be looking at African historic images of women. I'm going to introduce a lot about African culture here. We're also going to be looking at filmic projection of femininity, and then we will now just juxtapose all of this against biblical conceptual framing of femininity. And that's where I need all of us. I'm afraid now, because many of you are theologians, right? I'm afraid now. But I mean, I have very good people here. Now, even for this study, we must bear in mind that the Nollywood industry has also been selected for this interrogation in line with the 6 movies selected for the previous research. To this end, these questions are germane. To what extent are Nigerian movies reflective of the African cultural reality? To what extent is feminism a counter-motion of the traits and identity of Africa and biblical women? Now, I'll start by telling us a very short story, very short story. This story is basically to kind of create some kind of context for grounding one of the key concepts as used in this study. So this story happens in Nigeria, in a dedicated Christian home, in a typical African setting where preference or priority is still given to masculinity. Now, this certain successful businessman who runs a multi-billion-dollar company has a son who is not towing his line of business, who has deviated into what you can best describe as a not-so-successful musical career. Now, this man has a daughter also who is towing his line of business. Adaeze, the daughter, worked relentlessly to become one of the directors of the company. And so she had always nurtured the ambition of becoming of taking over the company at some point. But Adaeze's hopes were dashed at some point when her father, instead of introducing her as his next of kin, based on competence, introduces another man as his next of kin. Now, Adaeze was distraught, no doubt, but she never for once tried to usurp the power position of the new managing director. Neither did she adopt that sit-down look attitude. Now, the sit-down look attitude in Nigeria is like playing the second fiddle. Adaeze decided and set the ball rolling for herself and indeed the company. Now the key words here is get the work done. Now Adaeze was no doubt confronted by the reality of the father's ill health, that having to pay back accumulated bank loans, and of course, having to rescue the company from the claws of unscrupulous competitors who only wanted the company to crash. But like I said, the key phrase in this study is what? Get the work done. And that was it. In spite of the fact that Adaeze was only given a 2-week ultimatum, she turned everything around. Now, get the work done as a phrase is the context upon which our word, feminism, is conceived in this study. Now, we first and foremost need to push away from the dogmatism of labels. I know that a lot of things have been said about feminism, and I know that in Africa, many people are against feminism because they think that it is anti-African. It is alien to African culture. Now, many Christians also think that they have a lot of reservations about feminism. Now, feminism in this study is not constructed as an anti-male construct. It's not conceived as an anti-male construct. It is not conceived as oppressive or trying to usurp the position of power of men in the society or anything. We're redefining feminism. And we're basically basing our assumption, the reality of our period, we're basically looking at how we can reconstruct feminism to suit the reality of our time. And our key phrase here is, get the work done. Now, in view of this study aligns with Bell Hooks, who has defined feminism in line with the consciousness of feminine action rather than those flawed identity. Having said that, we may now proceed into looking at the 3 definitions of femininity. I say this categorically, first and foremost, because this is very important, that never in the history of Africa have women ever operated without any religious umbrella, either as a cultural practice of the people or simply as an expression of religion. Now, this is to say that in Africa, women have always functioned under some religious backgrounds, accentuated by the cultural practice, their customs, their belief, their way of life generally. And all of these, at one point or the other, have presented before these women in history a lot of challenges. But guess what? Women in Africa were never laid back. Long before the introduction or the encroachment of, somebody's laughing, long before the encroachment of the colonialists, in quotes, women in Africa were never laid back. They were never laid back. They had their identities in virtually everything. They were very successful at everything. Take, for instance, now many times when we talk about the achievements of women, we want to often premise them either against their reproductive commitments or their productive roles, and that's what we're going to do in this study, to give us some kind of better understanding and categorization. Now, on the basis of their reproductive commitments or their productive roles, African women in history were said to be instrumental to the population growth of the region today known as Africa, without which the lives of blacks will basically cease to exist within this region, or that space will be taken over by the West. And I'm sure that many of us are already conversant with the scramble for Africa, which took place between 1881 and 1914. Now, even within the nuclear homes, African women were always defined as powerful. They had great influence. They did a lot of things. African women in history demonstrated a lot of competence, taking charge of the home, managing all the resources, including human resources, without necessarily sending out signals that they were the ones in charge. And that's why in recent times, scholars have said that these are expressions of liberal, womanist, and snail-sense feminism. Now, in addition to that, the anthropologist Steady Philomena also thinks that all of these contributions from women are basically part or an expression of a strand of humanistic feminism. And I think I want to agree with that, because women contribute in ways that we cannot really understand. Now, that is the definition of femininity on one hand. I'm speaking very fast so that I don't use more than 20 minutes. Now, secondly, the identity of femininity in Africa is bold, It is beautiful. It is adorable. It is powerful. It is commendable. It is a whole lot that we cannot describe in one sentence. Because women in Africa, in African history, were said to take frontal position in so many areas. And I'm not just talking about the nuclear family, I'm not just talking about the extended family, I'm talking about societal development, I'm talking about economic development, I'm talking about management of human resources, I'm talking about maintenance and stability in virtually every field and every aspect of life. Take, for instance, in agriculture. African women were said to be the backbone of subsistence farming for a very long time, to a tune of about 60 to 70% of the agricultural toils. And this is a known fact, because a lot of documents back up this claim. Now, some of these women were also said to have their footprints in the development of Africa's capitalist economy. Because these women went into buying and selling of goods and services, many of them developed household industry, even within their very small units. They developed household industry. Some of them operated the local market system. You understand with African women and market system and all that. Many of them even shifted a little further by establishing long-distance trade networks, which connected not just African societies, but also Africa to the rest of the world. This is the definition of femininity before this encroachment that we're all talking about. Now, some of these women were said to have claimed their position amongst the noble against all odds. Many of these women were, some of them, not many of them, were elevated to the height of monarchs and queens. Some of them basically seized their positions. Now, I know that some women would rather want to be princesses and queen mother, but some of them did not, they were not restricted to that statutory status for women. They pushed a little further, getting the work done at different phases. Now, that's not to talk about agriculture, that's not to talk about religion. Women played very significant roles, very, very significant role. Now, safe to say at this point that the traits of radicalism, liberalism, humanistic feminism, and secularism are the identities of African women before the encroachment from the Western world. And some of these are actually portrayed by the Nollywood industry. Now, because this is a multidisciplinary study, we're going to be looking at everything from little angles. Now, the Nollywood industry is another topic that a lot of people really want to listen to. The Nollywood industry started officially in the 1960s after Nigeria's independence, but the naming of the industry, Nollywood, was actually between 2000 and 2002, according to Jonathan Hayes. The Nollywood industry is said to be the third largest industry, film producing industry in the world. I'm sure that many of us must have seen Nollywood. If you have not seen any Nollywood movie, let me see your hand up. What have you been doing? You've seen a lot. Oh, yeah. Yes, we need to go out and see Nollywood movies. They have a lot of things to say about our culture, not just about our culture, about the culture of the world. So the Nollywood industry is subdivided into the ethnic line and, of course, the religious lines. And then the religious lines brought in the spectacles of spirituality, religion, evangelism, morality, and the rest of them. So whether it is the secular line or the religious line, the Nollywood industry projects Africa's cultural reality. And that's why the industry has been chosen to investigate the projection of femininity. Now, according to this industry, women are usually portrayed in the usual stereotype or the archetypal ways. The archetypal ways is seeing women from a more psychological perspective. So they either see women as the not so special species, or the gossip, or queens and princesses and mothers and maidens as caregivers and lovers and huntresses and the rest of them. But outside of all of these projections, some scholars have identified other ways through which femininity is defined through the Nigerian film industry. According to Elizabeth Johnson, femininity is defined wherein women are seen as either objects or subjects to be controlled. That saddens my heart, but it is the reality of our time. And that hasn't really changed in spite of everything. And this is basically seen in the relationship between the father and the wife, the father and the daughter, the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, the brother and the sister and the rest of them, as objects that you can either buy, commodify, or anything. And as now, another says that femininity is defined in the victim, that women are often defined as either victim, who are passive, they are honest, they play passive roles, they are honest, but they are often exploited. That tells a lot about the African culture still. And I've started to read about things like this. Now, some other sources think that femininity is portrayed in the idea of the bad girl. And I've seen positivity in either the victim, playing the victim, or playing the bad girl. I'm seeing positivity and negativity in now. This study has also gone further to identify other ways through which femininity is defined in Nollywood. In either the dominant or the quiescent characters. Now, these characters are basically women who stand in the shadow of their father, their brother, until their responsibility is taken over by their husband. These characters never develop from the beginning of their life to the end of their life, and that is how it is in real life. Some women are just flat. They never contribute anything meaningful to the society. They are never decision makers because their ability to decide is somehow subsumed under some religious codes or cultural code or simply societal hostility. But some of them are just afraid being who they are. Now, on the other side, we have dynamic characters. Now, when we want to talk about the dynamic characters, we have to be extremely careful because there are both the pluses and the negative. On the one hand, are women we describe as bold and powerful. As a matter of fact, in Africa, in the whole of Africa, there's no way you talk about femininity without referencing the mothers of the night. You call them witches. We call them owners of the world. This group of women basically will power over anything and everything. They seek power from the most mundane thing. There's always a caveat because some other power can always consume that kind of power. But they are still described as powerful women. Two of the movies selected portrayed femininity in this manner. The last are women, still the dynamic characters. They are women you can describe as also powerful. They are goal-getters. They are resolute thinkers, they are resilient in everything. They basically seek after their dreams and aspirations. They control our society one way or the other. Two of the movies have also portrayed femininity in this manner. The first movie told earlier, and then another one. Again, I would like to go straight to the last one, where I will basically be needing your contribution to my study. And this is basically looking at biblical conceptual framing of femininity. This is, in fact, a very tough one for me, I must confess. But we will push through in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So, I have basically selected three characters, Leah, Ruth, and Esther. And the reason for the selection is that they basically fit into the feminist ideological framework that I'm investigating presently. I know many of us are already conversant with their story, but I'll ask us to shift our understanding, theological understanding, a little, like reading a piece of literature. I know the Bible is not just a piece of literature, it's a whole lot more than that. But I just want us to say, or see these characters like reading characters from pieces of literatures. The first thing is that what do these women have in common? And how may we identify their character traits in order to talk about femininity? Drawing examples from the good book. The first thing is that these women have very noticeable characters because at some point they were able to defy the odds against the agenda to become strong forces that shape scriptural Bible and scriptural literatures. Leah, for instance, came from commonplace to a place of reference. Ruth, like Esther, has an entire chapter named after her. Now, this is to say that these characters have very conspicuous identity, bearing in mind that women only played minor roles in the story told by men during their time of existence. Now, these characters can also be described as family and culturally oriented because they were well defined within their different family units. These characters were religious, whether they were worshiping idols at that time and at one time, and then following the Israeli God at the other time or something like that. But these are religious women. Now, the character traits of these women can also be molded under the thematic trust of long suffering. But most importantly, some traits of feminism have been identified in these women. Take, for instance, the story of Leah. Leah stood in the shadow of her sister Rachel for a very long time. Leah was despised because she was not Jacob's original plan. Leah was objectified, used as a token of deception or falsehood, or however we call it. Leah was basically means to an end for her father, who, from, as far as I'm concerned, wanted cheap labor. Leah became pitiable, and she became a symbol of struggle, hoping that her fertility, that is being able to procreate, because according to the scriptures, God blessed her, God opened her womb, hoping that her fertility will be able to bring the much desired love and warmth of her husband. But that never came. But at some point in time, Leah was able to push beyond the body flaws, because according to the scriptures, beauty resonated in the sister Rachel. My own interpretation is that she may have been flawed from the beginning of her life, one way or the other. But at some point, she pushed beyond the body flaws. She gravitated to a new level of understanding. Now, Leah did something. She exchanged what she had with what she wanted. She used what she had at that moment to get what she wanted. She developed the gods as a woman. I mean, at that time, no woman could develop that kind of gods to confront the husband, to demand an extra night of conjugal duty, using the phrase, I have hired you. That means at that moment she claimed ownership over this man. And that, of course, is not to forget other humanistic traits found in Leah, which are also comparable to those found in Ruth. Now, in Ruth, I have seen Ruth from the radicalist perspective in this study. Although some sources think that she is compliant in the bid to champion patriarchal submergence and progeny. Ruth took audacious decisions in the Bible that later changed her story completely. For instance, Ruth challenged cultural or structures, societal structures at every level. She's in this study seen as a non-conformist by virtue of her marriage to the immigrants, which suggests a complete disconnection from the cultural pattern, the cultural belief of those people, and a total disconnect from their religious practice. Because she abandoned her religion and followed another religion entirely. These are surely feminist moves. And as a matter of fact, these are the first set of feminist moves that Ruth took. Ruth also confronted gender patriarchy. She swears her allegiance to her mother-in-law and not a man. I mean, when a man dies, it is expected that the woman finds another man. But no, she would rather die with her mother-in-law. These are also feminist traits defined by compassion. They are humanistic traits, and they are defined by compassion. Now, even in Israel, without being told to do anything, Ruth took a lot of transformatory movements. She took a lot of steps. For instance, I'm afraid to say that, but I'll skip it. For instance, she went to another man's house. That's my interpretation of it. She actually went to another man's house. She went to Boaz's house. That's what the Bible describes. And that's my own definition of it. So she went visiting, even before she was told to do that, although the intention was to, it was because of famine. Ruth challenged so many structures. So even when it felt like it was Naomi's decisions that were being held, Ruth's stance clearly defined her goals and her missions. For instance, when she eventually went into Boaz, when she went to meet him, it was Ruth that was taking the decision. It was Ruth instructing him on what to do and how to go about it. Now, this being unparalleled activated gender reversal opportunity, and of course the reversal of the inheritance law. Because Naomi, which could neither have the husband property, could now have it. Now, this is what you would describe as bold risk-taking steps, and they end Ruth's tag as a worthy woman. Better than 7 sons. I wish somebody would describe me as that someday. Now, the part of Esther is also described as a very beautiful woman, but she was also challenged at a time when women were less regarded in the land. She had her innocence stolen, she had her pride, her purity, everything stolen. But being courageous, Esther used her beauty and courage to change the situation around her. She confronted the king, even without prior invitation, declaring, "And if I perish, I perish." These statements of finality are surely feministic, whether we like it or not. They are very strong statements of feminism. And yet, we often want to preach against feminism. I'll conclude. My conclusion is this, that the Nollywood industry, being a veritable tool for the investigation of the cultural reality of the African people, has beamed the searchlight on the need to deconstruct femininity and feminism in Africa. And that feminism justified through tripodal lens is never a counter work of the religious traits and identity of Christianity and Christian women in Africa. As a matter of fact, Christian women in Africa can operate upon well-constructed and articulated feminist ideologies because they possess the right of personality, being able to express one's personality without fear. Now, all of this conclusion has led to the theory of feminine transversality. This theory is still being developed, but it basically looks at ways through which African Christian ideologies can be better understood following the cultural reality of the African people. Thank you very much.
All right, I'll introduce our next speaker, Dr. Marie Joy Crane. Marie is a PhD in Transformational Development from Asia Graduate School of Theology, Philippines. A Langham Scholar, Marie now works at Langham Literature Asia while serving as adjunct faculty at several institutions such as William Carey International University, Asian Theological Seminary, Asia Pacific Nazarene Theological Seminary, and Wesleyan University of the Philippines. Marie's advocacy for children at risk allow her to serve as a research consultant for International Justice Mission for ECPAT, International New York. She also serves as a research advisor at Fuller Theological Seminary for the Doctor of Intercultural Studies program. Her title today is Uwinayan, How the Christian Faith and Filipino Culture Build Relationships That Help Urban Poor Women Survive and Thrive. I'm going to just be here and be her helper with the PowerPoint.
Yes, thank you, Ellie. So, mabuhay. That is how we formally greet friends in the Philippines, but more than just saying hello, the root word of mabuhay, perhaps Sir Stan, who lived in the Philippines for 25 years, would know this. The root word is buhay, it means life. So when you say mabuhay, you speak of the tenor of the meeting that you desire to have, and that it may be life-giving and life-sustaining for you and the others that you encounter. So for those of you who are here, and those who will join us via the video that will be posted in YouTube, mabuhay, Calvin friends and our friends online. Before I share any further, please allow me to thank first Langham Partnership UK and Ireland, and my family here in Grand Rapids, spiritual family. Uncle Mark and Auntie Marian came, and they represent Langham. So it's a ministry started by English pastor and theologian John Stott to equip pastors and theologians from the majority world. So I'm one of those that benefited from this ministry. In fact, they helped me finish my PhD studies. And second, of course, to Nagel Institute here at Calvin. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much. My heart is still grieving with what happened in Michigan State University. And as I reflected on what has transpired, I realized that a different kind of violence has been pervasive and prevailing in my motherland as well. It's more insidious, and it continues to claim tens of thousands of Filipino lives yearly. I'm speaking about the violence of poverty. So Gandhi and Gustavo Gutierrez has reflected much on this, and what they have reflected on resonates so much in my context too. So next slide, please. 54% of Filipino families self-identified as poor based on the food that they can afford to purchase or not purchase on a day-to-day basis. In Metro Manila alone, the country's capital, 693,000 Filipino families experience, I'll say that again, 693,000 Filipino families experience involuntary hunger according to a survey done by the Social Weather Station, which is one of the country's most reliable research centers. Despite the campaign of the previous president to build more infrastructure, development remained to be non-inclusive and the economic plan ineffective because thousands are still falling through the cracks by the day. Being non-inclusive is not the only conundrum of development in the Philippines. Progress, most often than not, is a siren call. Sociologists purport that development often leads to the atomization of societies. The more a community moves to modernization, the more it loses its communal bonds. The focus is turned from we to I, from others to self. The traditional community, which used to be fortified by relationships and shared values, now becomes a market society that operates via contracts and fixed-term agreements. This transition, which comes with the advancement and development, tends to reinforce an even stricter survival of the fittest schema in society and poses a higher risk for the vulnerable sectors. Non-inclusive economic growth and the corrosion of relationships in the community are core concerns for the discipline of transformational development. That's what that's the field that I'm into. Because this paradigm upholds that everyone must be afforded the freedom to flourish as human being. These are impediments. The two conundrums are impediments not only to attaining just progress here and now, but also to realizing our longer vision of shalom. Shalom is both a business of the human and the divine. For while it is Christ who will ultimately bring eternal peace, humans are still given the agency to create pockets of shalom in their communities, and such pockets of shalom are the quiet birthing of Christ's kingdom among people today. Looking at the Filipino reality, women have always been at the forefront, especially at the grassroots level, in making sure that the community is intact and that no one is relegated, discarded, or left behind. Because women are traditionally concerned with home and family and community, they are the first to recognize and act on threats to survival. Women's instinct to preserve and nurture life drives them to build from the ground up an alternative perspective on addressing poverty, one that is based on harmony and cooperation, non-violence and dignity. From the concerns of kumakalam na sikmura, I'm not speaking in tongues, that's Tagalog for hunger, to the issues of human rights, Filipino women ensure the survival and welfare of those around them. From immersion activities, I realized that women do this not with the help of the government or institutionalized systems, but simply by building relationships around them. And now through research-based evidence, I can confirm that they build these connections by leveraging values from the Filipino culture and the Christian faith. I always knew that faith and culture have played major roles in women-led community building phenomenon. I see it in urban poor communities in the Philippines. I just could not put a finger to it. With research, or through research, let me say that. Research, I believe, is an activity of the intellect and intuition. So I always felt that there's something to do with faith and culture among this community building thing that women are doing. So I set out to discover what substantive theory may arise from the urban poor communities that I have served and worked with. So there are two things that I wanted to do. First is to explore the experiences of Filipino women in poverty. Second is to articulate the role of the Christian faith and Filipino culture in building relationships among such women. And third is to draw an indigenous theory of development from this phenomenon. One of the things that I have learned is that development cannot be prefabricated and then transplanted to another setting. And so if you set out to understand development, it must be very contextual. Next slide. So I conducted a transformational grounded theory research, a design that combines principles of action research and grounded theory methodology among 50 women ages 18 to 60 who live in urban poor communities. The first phase of data gathering was through participant observation for 10 weeks. And then the second phase was through storyboard and focus group discussion activities that were conducted for 12 weeks. Part of the reasons why I'm here at Nagel is to turn this dissertation that's already defended into a book for publication. Throughout, concurrent data gathering and data analysis were done, and the grounded theory methodology of coding, such as open coding, actual coding, selective coding, was carried out. So let's look at the experiences of Filipino women in poverty. Looking at the income dimension of poverty, women in urban poor communities participate largely in the informal economy. 57% of workers in this sector are women. My observation and reflexive journals gave faces to these statistics as I saw women working as lavanderas or laundry women, ambulant vendors, or owners of neighborhood sundry stores. Women living in urban poverty participate more in the informal economy because of their level of education and the flexibility these types of jobs afford them to perform their familial duties. However, the informal economy operates in ways where women have limited access to opportunities for fair income, security in the workplace, and social protection. The COVID pandemic exacerbated the economic situation of women in urban poor communities. By the second quarter of 2021, 4.14 million Filipinos were without jobs, and the female unemployment rate was placed at 9.1%. Many of the participants in the research locales were affected by economic losses due to COVID. Some of the women who were employed and were earning at least minimum wage shared that they lost their jobs as businesses closed down temporarily for months and some businesses for good. This loss is even more devastating for housewives dependent on their husbands and partners who were also unemployed due to the pandemic recession. Women in impoverished community also contend with non-income dimensions of poverty. Lack of access to health facilities and services is caused by multiple and intersecting barriers such as the expensive cost of medical care and limited capacity of underfunded and underemployed public hospitals. The women confessed that instead of prioritizing their health and welfare, they would rather spend their money to buy the needs of their families. Similar to the economy, the COVID-19 pandemic worsened the health situation because many regular medical services, including those related to reproductive health and prenatal care, have been disrupted as the public health funds were placed on pandemic response efforts. Violence is another non-income dimension of poverty that women in urban poor situations face. The participants in the research lived in communities where alleged drug war-related extrajudicial killings took place. Some of the victims were relatives of the women who participated in the study, and a number of them shared harrowing stories of how violence has traumatized the children and the mothers in their neighborhoods. Nonetheless, the most hurtful violence done to the women, or that the women experience, is one that happens at home. So Marquez, who is a researcher from the University of the Philippines, flagged that 1 in 4 Filipino women experiences intimate partner violence. So bear in mind that this kind of situation is riddled with shame and guilt, and so there are more women than what is said in the statistics. 2 of the participants bravely shared their stories in the research of IPV survival, or intimate partner violence. But appropriating the report with the data of this research, that would mean 12 out of 50 participants have experienced IPV. I also found out that women who belong to the same economic demographics as the participants are 50% more likely to experience physical violence than women who earn higher income. So income is a factor in experiencing violence. Poverty is indeed not homogeneous. And it does not affect every person the same. There are specific issues to poverty that affect women more than men, to wit, labor and income, access to healthcare services, violence, especially intimate partner violence. Further, it is these challenges that bring Filipino women in these urban poor communities together. They form relationships to navigate these struggles in the hope of rising above these problems together. In the Filipino psyche, we always have this, what's called sama-sama, being together. So let's look at the Christian faith and culture and its role in building relationships that help people or help women survive and thrive. There are two loci of relationship building for women in urban poor communities. The first one is neighborhood, where the way of building connections is organic and informal. In the neighborhood, pakikipagkwentuhan, in English, sharing stories is vital because it initiates connection. So it's not just gossiping or it's not just gossip mongering. It's building connections through sharing of stories. It is also a means for women to convey the problems they experience and collaboratively seek solutions to it. Sharing of food was also mentioned by the participants as a means of starting friendly relationships among neighborhoods. For Filipinos, to share food is to show visceral care. Malapit sa bituka, it's got deep compassion to share your food. So thank you for your got deep compassion with the cookies. The second locus of relationships among women in urban poor communities is the center. So center in Filipino language pertains to Christian organizations where the connections of the participants are built and where their interactions are more structured. Here, two main activities pull the women together. The centers offer livelihood programs and Bible study. The centers help alleviate income-related challenges that come with poverty as they build the capacity of the women to augment their household earnings. Even more, because of the camaraderie nourished through the Bible study, the women also find encouragement and emotional support. The women referred more to the informal domain of the relationship building, the neighborhood, more as their preferred loci. The participants associate relations that help them survive and thrive more with their informal connections in the neighborhood. The data in the research show that Filipino people operate largely in the informal locus and that micro-level interactions are vital.
I had to reset the computer.
Okay.
I'll catch up with you.
Okay,
Sorry.
This is in slide 8.
Okay.
The research also focused on how the Christian faith enables the building of relationships among women for surviving and thriving. The data of the participants showed that it is through instilling and the practice of Christian values such as faith, stewardship. So these are the codes that came out. Faith, stewardship, harmony, generosity, wisdom, and love. That these are the values that came out. Connections were initiated in the neighborhoods through these values. In the center, it's neighborhood and centers. So faith refers to the participants' belief and relationship with God, as well as how faith transformed them and their relationships with their families for the better. The next code would be stewardship, and stewardship represents the participants' statements on the management of their finances and the significance of their work, which they learn from financial seminars and studies, or Bible studies. Stewardship also refers to themes of environmental care, such as sanitation, garbage disposal that they informally make a system of, community gardening that are taken in hand by the participants. Harmony, the code harmony, refers to the women's unity and how this unity moves them towards progress. Generosity represents the willingness of the participants to share their sources with others as a response to what they are learning from the Bible. This also refers to the women's sacrificial giving of finances and time to respond to the needs of their fellow women whose family members were facing life-threatening health situations. Yes, still in slide 8. Wisdom denotes how the women have received godly advice from each other, especially insights from instructions of the biblical values. And lastly, the code love from the research speaks of the emotional and moral support the participants receive from each other that they value more than financial help. So women who live in urban poor communities understand that progress is incomplete and inauthentic without spiritual and character growth. Repeatedly, they pointed to a framework of development that transcends the capitalistic mindset of wealth building. The women's statements coincide with Parker's reflection on the poverty of Latin America and its unbridled move towards capitalism. Capitalism, according to Parker, carries within itself the limits of its horizon since it has no possible escape from its golden calves and shatters on the ultimate unsatisfaction of vital human needs, including the deepest longings of human beings today. The women spoke of their deepest longings, and what are these? These are dignity and self-worth that comes from having a good relationship with God, with their neighbors, with creation, and with their own selves. The women's understanding of progress is similar to transformational development's core tenet of shalom. It is just, peaceful, merciful, relationships that bring beneficial change in the long run. This is slide 9. It's further. Somewhere. There you go. Thank you.
One more?
This is perfect. Okay, thank you. So looking now at the Filipino culture, participants build relationships through the appreciation and practice of Filipino values such as damayan or empathy, kapwa, which is the self and other, similar to Ubuntu from South Africa, loob, which is relational will, and pagkakaintindihan, which is understanding. Damayan or empathy refers to how the women in the communities bear difficulties together, from mundane challenges to disasters like typhoons. By the way, Philippines, we always have about 20 typhoons coming to our areas every year. So they navigate that mundane challenges to typhoons, community fires, and even the COVID pandemic. Damayan or empathy is associated with bayanihan or mutual aid, cooperation, and cooperative endeavor. Kapwa, the next code from the research, is shared identity or the self in other, represents the women's recognition that a part of oneself is shared with others. The participants use kapwa babae or fellow female. It implies their awareness and recognition that they have shared identity as women. And loob refers to the participants' relational will and also covers what the women call kabutihang loob, magandang loob, which is nobility that's shared by individuals or by human beings. Pagkakaunawaan describes the natural rupture and repair in the women's relationships. So, and this is vital to being one, to being in unity. Pagkakaunawaan, understanding. The women in urban poor communities perceive that putting Filipino values into practice helps them towards development. In the participants' worldview, the finest aspect of Filipino culture, which are relationship-oriented values, contribute and help build relationships that lead them to progress. Looking at the results of the study, specifically on the data set of the Filipino culture, what is most important to the participants about development or progress is once again beyond money. Contrary to the understanding that the poor only wants to move up the socio-economic ladder, women share that it is their relationship with God, especially with their family, that is most important. The reason for this is that Filipino worldview is holistic. It has aspirations for spiritual well-being, and in fact, it's not even worldview. A Filipino scholar, theologian would say it's a felt view. So we understand things, but we also feel things. So looking at the results of the study, or contrary to understanding that they just want to move up the economic ladder, they want relationships, good relationships between God, between neighbors, and with creation and with themselves. So, therefore, leading to an understanding, it helps me to understand that development that is enmeshed with their understanding of development is enmeshed with their understanding of God. It has aspirations for emotional well-being, therefore leading to a concept of progress that is communal, unified, and not sacrificing family relationships and friendships. So what the research has achieved is not very different from what was done by World Bank 10, 15 years ago. It's called Voices of the Poor. And so what they have found out from 60 plus countries, it resonates with the microcosm of the communities that I worked with. So very interesting that, especially with development practitioners, we come to the community thinking that we know what the poor want. but it's important to listen to them because they really want more than financial or material help. So let's look at the indigenous theory that came out of this. So through the three phases of coding, open, actual, and selected coding, development as building, the theory, substantive theory that came up is development as building relationships through the interweaving of Christian values and Filipino values. Jayakaran Kumar has, Christian Jayakaran has development as freedom. We have practitioners who would say development as shalom. So the contribution of the research is development through, it's a values-oriented definition of development. From the data of the women living in urban poor communities, a values-oriented understanding of development has emerged. The emphasis of this development theory is not merely on wealth and material resources, but on well-being, including human experiences identified by the women, mental, emotional, social, and the spiritual aspects of life. The end goal of development for the participants and for this theory is neither gentrification nor mere poverty alleviation, but transformation to a whole and meaningful life of good relationships. The codes are properties of this. The codes are the properties of this good relationship, one that helps them to survive the difficulties of life and thrive as persons. And these are the codes over here. There is a seamless interfacing of Christian values and Filipino values. This is seen through the co-occurrence of the codes during the analysis. This shows that what is important to the Christian worldview is also important to the Filipino worldview. The root cause of this interfacing is the Filipino holistic framework of life and human experiences. The image here is the theoretical model by Nagel. We go to the next slide. Thank you, Miss Nelly. I know how awkward it is. We go to the next slide. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So banig or woven mat. So the frame represents the loci or domain of the relationships and which are the neighborhood and centers wherein relationships are initiated. The spokes and the stakes, which are the threads that stand, or the spokes, the threads that stand upright, represent the Christian values, and the weavers represent the Filipino values. So banig woven mat was chosen as the illustration of the theory because one, the interweaving of the weavers and the spokes to make one whole mat represents the interfacing of the Christian values and Filipino values in relationship building, which serve as the safety net of the women. And banig or woven mat, it's a ubiquitous image in the Filipino society. You know, it's a cradle to grave thing. You are born in a banig, and then sadly, when you die, you're also wrapped in the banig. Banig, or they are an apt representation of this indigenous framework of development. This model is drawn from an everyday Filipino household article. It taps to their consciousness and makes it easy to comprehend. In fact, when you look at the dissertation, we are required to write about 70,000 words. And so it's thicker than what I want to do. But when I presented the banig to the women, they were able to understand it quickly. And so I had to do that. That's called member checking and research. And they understood it, and they, of course, agreed to, or they validated the theory. So Ugnayan presents the narrative of people who are experiencing Christ in their development journey. Ugnayan is relationship. These are the little stories that add nuance and depth of meaning to the grand narrative of development. We can say it's the voice of the poor Filipino women informing the development narrative. So I will end here. Thank you, Ms. Nelly. Thank you, everyone.
I'll just leave that on here.
Okay.
All right. You need to get a drink of water, but I think maybe we have some questions or conversations that yeah. We understand if the clock is ticking, go ahead and help yourself with a cookie on the way out. But if you have some questions or conversations, would you like to stand up here?
Yes, of course.
Yes. So we'll post any questions to both or to one or. Any questions or comments?
I'll start off. I already alerted her that I had a question. And I'm in the film industry. We're in exhibition actually. And I've been in Africa a couple times. And I'm wondering what the recent American films, such as the Black Panther films and the other, accurately use the concepts that you just presented about African women, because I know films have strong African women characters in them. Are you familiar with that film?
Which of the films?
The Black Panther film. There are two of them now.
No, not really.
You're not familiar? Okay.
I can't remember.
Okay. Well, okay. So then you're going to have a hard time with that question then.
Oh, okay.
The women in these films are military people. They're strong people. They're at the center of the culture in the various films that have been.
That's just like Woman King. There's a new one.
Yes, and that's
yes. Okay. So what's the question? Yes.
Well, I just wondered if you knew the films, whether you thought they drew on, if they did their research with respect to Nollywood films and the portrayal of women, whether there was a meshing there or connection.
Okay. You want me to answer that now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll say that the first thing we should understand is that when we talk about feminism in Nigeria, feminism in Africa, it's not something that just happened haphazardly or something that is just coming up. So the film in question, this Woman King, is a product of research in that, and that's to say that a lot of women were already doing things in Africa long before so many things that are happening. Do you understand? So I would want to say that whether it's a product of research or not, and regardless of what has been projected in the movies, projected a lot of very strong women, warriors, women that led wars and won a lot of wars and all of that, I still think that it sort of projected Africa in some similar light to that of the Western world. Do you understand? But of course, we should understand that what gave birth to feminism in Africa is different from what gave birth to feminism in the West. It's completely different. So if we're talking about feminism in Africa, we're talking about not just gender dominance, we're also talking about racial dominance. That's one thing that we should always understand, because I was reading one book. I don't know whether I've answered your question, but I'm trying to figure out what aspect of it you're referring to as regards my research. But I was reading one book in order to find out how the West really portrayed women. And I came across Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House. And I was like, the projection of women in Africa was actually better. If this is the projection of women in the Western world, that means that Africans have no right to even say that we want to be feminists, because you've always been feminist in your own little corners. You've taken charge of everything. You've done a whole lot of things over the years without consideration, without the term feminists. So if we're to compare that, I don't think, how do I say this now? It's a new experience entirely for Africans. It's a completely new experience for Africans. So whether we project this feminist concept in our film or not, sometimes, for instance, in the movie, the idea was not to project feminism. It was just to project African culture. In this film, The Woman King, it wasn't about saying that women have to be this, women have to be that, women have to fight for their rights. Even if those thematic aspects of it may sort of deviate into portraying feminism and all that, we simply wanted to project women in their true color, in their true identity, which was my understanding of the movie. He's not convinced. I didn't get a question.
Then perhaps the terminology might be a little bit shifted. When we talk about feminism, which you already correctly addressed, is the westernized, a colonized understanding of male and female gender issues, so that African-American people go through, they tend to use the womanism instead of a feminism. That is much more correct conceptualization of the womanness in the other particular kind of a culture, including the racial issues and power structure issues, gender issues, or a little more comprehensive, holistic understanding of it. So perhaps changing the terminology from the feminist to the womanist might be much more appropriate for your proposal.
So, I'm happy that you have said this now, because in Africa, we don't believe in feminism. We would rather align with womanism. But there is a whole lot of criticism on that already. I don't want to be a womanist. I want to be a feminist. Why can't I be a feminist? Why can't I go after the things that I want? Why can't I project myself in the right image, regardless of what cultural barrier I am faced with? Womanism, I don't want to identify as a womanist. Being a womanist is saying that, of course, I agree that I want to be, I want to make positive impact in the society, but I still want to be subjected under a male umbrella. That's the idea of womanism.
I don't think so. I think you
In
misunderstood.
Africa,
Okay.
in Africa, that's the idea of womanism. It's like saying as much as we want to align with this, feminism is like an umbrella of many colors. So just like you have womanism, we also have snail sense feminism. And these are the kind of women who will just, they toe the line tactically to get to their destination. So we have so many tags. And I'm happy that, it's one area that I think I should connect with. If theology aligns with womanism, that's a take home for me right now. I've never heard that before. I thought that womanism was always an African concept. I never imagined that it would come from theology. But there are a lot of criticism on now whether we align with the theological perspective of womanism or snail sense feminism or black Africanism or black humanism, it has different tags presently. The major umbrella term is feminism. This is not to force it down our throats. It's just like saying that I am a man. I am a man of color. I am black. I am brown. I am green. The fact remains that what? You are a man. Determined by either your biological sex or your gender, which is a cultural construct. So feminism is a whole lot. Whether you align with the strict adherence to certain rules and regulations as practiced within and without, or you just want to play the subtle role in your very little corner. Thank you. But I'll still have to talk to you about it. Because I really want to learn more about this. I really, really want to learn more about it.
Shirley,
I wanted to ask a question to both of you, but I think, Marie, it came out more in what you were describing, your research. Sometimes there are people who posit that women are very relational by nature, and people debate that back and forth. But one of the criticisms is that women, they use relationships to build their influence and their position within existing structures.
Oh.
So I was curious if in the relationship building you saw any women who, although poorer, at a certain point in their relationship building began to question the structures that had led them to be in pockets together of poverty.
That's honestly, I think, okay, I will answer that plainly. And I still have not researched that part. But I think the women are encumbered with survival concerns, that they haven't gone to a point of questioning the system. And we have heard it said time and again that the way to keep people from questioning system is to make them concerned about the day-to-day living. And that's what's happening. And so I took it upon my shoulder as a woman, a Filipino woman, to ask these questions, to begin to look into these things for them. So largely what I feel that I'm doing, I'm not trying to be a hero, but that's what I feel like. I have been blessed by God through people, through organizations, to be able to come to this point where I can have the space and the time to think about these bigger things. But sadly, when you go to the communities, it's a matter of day-to-day survival that they're still living in. But the good thing is, so I can tell a story about something where like the relationships, the building, the community affected the system. So there is in this urban poor community, in one of the research locales, women are not reached by reproductive health officers from the center. So they begin to realize that, hey, they're not looking at us. And it's a little bit it's complicated, it's complex, because in that community too, there are what we call they did not leave the Muslim communities, but they now say that they believe in Isa al-Masih, Jesus Christ. And so they see that they are not reached by the health workers, also largely because of religion. And so in their gathering in the community, they went to the barangay hall, they lobbied, and now finally the reproductive health people go to the community. So little steps like that. And that's what I think, like, especially with transformational development, because it's a Christian paradigm of development, we are told that you have to see things from macros, and you celebrate macro changes. But what I've learned largely is micro changes also work, and micro changes also help and change the lives of people. And so even if this is our space now, we celebrate it. But yes, to answer the question, they have not gone to that part of thinking yet, to that level of thinking yet. Thank you.
Maria, could you say a little bit about the particular the artwork or the weaving that you talked about? It's a beautiful illustration.
Thank you.
Beautiful metaphor. But that is, in the surface level, is beautifully kind of intersect with the Christian values and the Filipino value. But flip side, backside, there is always still lingering and difficulties and challenges, complexities. So what are the challenges, what are the tensions that Christian values and Filipinos values are intersecting?
Thank you, Dr. Wanli. Now I will consider that as I turn it into a book. Well, firstly, the limitation of the theory is that people need to understand Christian values first. I'm not saying that our values is different, Christian values different from another religion's values, but as you see the codes, it's defined by the women. So that's one of the limitations of that. Religion and culture in the Philippines they're not always at odds, if I may say that. Because the Philippines is largely firstly, we are a very religious people, but also we are largely a Christian nation. 90% of the Filipino people, more than 90% of the Filipino people are Christians, 80+% Catholic Christians, Roman Catholic Christians. I think only 5% evangelical Christians. But when you say words such as love, such as wisdom, somehow they do get that. But so I couldn't think at this point, top of head, any conflict between culture and religion. But of course, the limitation of the Banig theory is with the Christian values. I won't go and say, oh, this is also true in other communities. So only in the Christian theory.
I mean, that is a great explanation because almost 90% of Filipinos are Christians, which means the concepts themselves has been already intermingled and so deeply so that there might not be tensions or might be have any conflicts.
And the Banig imagery is a good imagery with your question too, because even when you look at the backside of the Banig, it's not ugly, it's still beautiful. It's like just reversing a different. I'm sure Sir Stan has seen that. I was hoping to bring a sample of the Banig, but I left it at home. Yeah, that's how it looks like. It's so sweet. Thank you, Professor. Yes.
I'd be interested to know, when you think about Nigerian cultures, because there are a variety of ethnic cultures, but also because Nigeria has a pretty even balance between Christian and Muslim populations. when you look at the intersection of religious values with Nigerian cultural values, how would you describe it?
Thank you for that question. Now, most times when we talk about religion in Nigeria, we're always quick to assume that it's just Christian and the Muslims. We have a lot other than that. We have the traditional religion. And under the traditional religion, we show that we have too many. You have those people following the tradition of Ogun, the god of the iron. You have some people following the tradition of Shango, god of thunder. You have some people following the tradition of Oshun, fertility god of water. So it's a whole lot. Now, because of the diverse nature of the country, you would describe religion in Africa, in Nigeria more specifically, as also very diverse, coming from different angles. But of course, Christianity and Islam are the two dominant religions in Nigeria. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if I could ask to Dr. Marie.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this relates directly to what you said. By the way, I really appreciate it. I learned a lot from it. But I'm thinking in terms of transformational development, and maybe this, I think it does relate to your study, but in terms of Christians working in transformational development, you know, you have the big mega churches in Manila that you often have some kind of a ministry to the poor, some kind of development work. On the other hand, you have groups, smaller groups that are just really working on the grassroots level with people. Which do you think has greater promise?
So I'll share a quick story. So in Manila, there is a dump site. It's so big. It's a garbage mountain, Payatas. Metro Manila, it's called Payatas. And then a Christian group went in and they introduced themselves. And one of the scavengers said, "Oh, you're a Christian group? There are 30 Christian groups here and our lives are still not changing." So it's really, and that is a quick story that really is just burned and etched into my heart because that confronts us. That quick whip is a confrontation to all our efforts. So quick answer, whether it's a mega church or a small group, I think the Waterloo is when we come into communities and act as agents of modernization rather than being agents of God's word. And I know this is sounding more like pastoral, but it really is incumbent upon these organizations to look at their goals and the way that they achieve it. Are they doing it as like other organizations do, or are they really doing it following principles from God's word? So whether big or not, I see, well, what I can say is this. Based on observation, the deeper transformation happens in small groups committed to a single community. Not like a broad stroke, mile wide but inch deep transformation. The deeper transformations, I can see this intergenerational poverty is being broken when a Christian group is committed into a certain place. That's a good thing to research. And that could be done quantitatively, so faster. That should be faster. Thank you.
The criterion would be get the job done.
Get the job done.
Whether it's a micro level or a macro level,
Yes.
that could be the kind of a threshold whether the transformation actually occurred.
Yes.
Get the job done.
Get the job done.
Yeah, sure.
Dr. Wang, you were saying something about my topic. You said you'd advise I change that to womanism, that Christians can be womanists.
That is the way that the biblical scholarship has been understood since 1970s. Particularly Afro-American biblical scholars, they were opposed to feminism because that feminism has been constructed by the white female scholars. So they, in order to challenge that, they want to broaden their understanding of racial issues, social stratification issues, gender issues altogether, so that they termed as a womanism, womanist. So that's how the biblical scholarship has been in the United States since 1970s on.
Okay, that's a take home for me.
I love that. I love that you asked about the back because some of the baniks are some of the baniks are also bad at the back, but those that are well done women are beautiful at the back too. So thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Is there another comment?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I was very interested in how you looked at Leah and Ruth and Esther. And I just wondered if there's a certain hermeneutic method, or, I mean, how did you look at them that way? I've never seen those stories in the way that you've seen them. So I wondered if there's a certain method that you use for looking at them.
I was actually trying to avoid this kind of question. But then, what I did as my methodology, because I employed grounded theory like her, I mean, it's part of the research with Nagel that you have to employ grounded theory. What I did for that aspect was purely random sampling. I just selected them randomly and then studied the characters and then did some kind of literature review on these characters. And there's another thing that I did, because when I got here, I realized that I would need a lot of assistance in gathering data for this. So I did some kind of very short survey. I created questions and I sent out questions here. A couple of responses came, and from the responses, I gathered that I could talk about Leah, Ruth, and Esther. And some of them mentioned Sarah, and then some of them said that, especially my friend, said something about Sarah. And then I think I agreed. I mean that Sarah may not fit perfectly into that feminist ideology because she had some kind of encounter with the maid, which does not necessarily portray women in the light, which of course we want to preach about. So I did some kind of sampling method. But like I said, it is not good enough to just have 3 people represent the entire work of God. So I'm hoping that I can get more. I refer to them as characters because I'm coming from the performing arts. So I refer to these people as characters. If I can get more characters, I'd so like it.
Did you ever think to go to the New Testament with the women characters there?
Yes, I'll also go through it's a whole lot of work. But I mean, if you have suggestions for me, I'll gladly welcome them. I will definitely touch the New Testament. Definitely touch the New Testament. Perhaps when I start developing the theory.
Everyone named Mary gives you a lot.
Sorry.
Everyone named Mary gives you a broad number to
Yes,
choose
Mary.
from.
I think somebody mentioned Mary actually.
Brother Lazarus.
Coming from the fact that she's the mother of the Savior, and I think somebody mentioned Mary in the very short survey that I took. So, I mean, perhaps when I start developing the theory, because my intention is to develop that transversal theory, to say that, I mean, that's coming from the knowledge of, a lot of people are asking for equality. You keep asking for equality. What are you doing? You can't expect that. I mean, it's a regular saying in Nigeria. You don't expect that a man takes you out for lunch, takes you out for dinner, and then pays the bill, and you still think that you're equal to the man. No, you're not equal. It has to be, there has to be some kind of relationship, some connectivity, some kind of responsibility that you have to take. For instance, part of the theory is that we have to redefine femininity. For you to say that you're a successful woman in Africa, you must be educated as far as I'm concerned. It's not just about Western education, it could also be skill acquisition. You have to define your gender, especially in this age. And to define your gender means that you must identify yourself appropriately. It must be determined by your biological sex and, of course, the social construct or the cultural construct. And then another thing is identify how you want people to identify you. So it's one thing to say that I'm feminine. It's another thing for people to see me as a man. Another thing is you must have social intelligence, social and cultural intelligence. Don't tell me you're a woman coming from the African worldview and you're not intelligent. I'm not just talking about being intelligent, being able to speak in public, being able to communicate in English and all that. You must have some social or cultural intelligence. And you must have sense of belonging within your environment. It's the African culture. Africans believe in this communal living, communal experience and all of that. So you must have all of this. Don't come and tell me that you want equality when you're not ready to stand up to the responsibility. If I have a man and I want to say to the man, I am equal. Anyway, I don't preach equality. I preach equity. And these are 2 different things entirely. Prof, I'll still need your knowledge about this. I don't preach equality, perhaps because of my African background. I preach equity. Give me what I need to survive. Sometimes we don't even need as much as the men. At other times, the men don't need as much as we do. So I preach equity. Give me the size of what I need to survive in this part of the world, or wherever I find myself. I don't believe in equality. Thank you.
Any other comments? Really appreciate the conversation here and the questions. And this is being recorded so we can go back and you can study some of the questions that you received too. So thank you so much for your attendance today.